The gas station sat like a lonely, fluorescent island in a sea of black asphalt and swaying, endless wheat. It was a traveler's rest in name only. In reality, it was a crumbling relic of the 1970s, miles from the nearest town, tethered to the world only by a single cracked two-lane highway that seemed to lead from nowhere to nothing. To the north, the road vanished into a horizon of dark clouds. To the south, it was swallowed by the oppressive, shifting wall of the cornfields that seemed to creep closer every time Finn blinked. Finn was 22 and running from a life that had become too loud, a chaotic mess of city noise, crushing debt, and the hollow expectations of the family he no longer recognized. He wanted the silence of the plains. He wanted a job where the only thing that mattered was the passage of time. The owner of the station, a man named Silas, whose skin was the texture of a sun-bleached tarp and who smelled of diesel fuel and peppermint, didn't ask for a resume or a background check. He simply gestured toward a laminated sheet of paper taped to the glass of the cigarette display with yellowed Scotch tape. "The night shift is 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., Silas said, his voice whistling through a gap in his teeth like wind through a cracked window. He handed Finn a heavy brass key that felt unnaturally cold and a flashlight with a flickering bulb. "Read the list. Don't skim it. Don't think you're smarter than the paper. If you break a rule, don't bother calling me. I won't answer, and I won't come to help. Just start walking and don't look at the sky. If you're lucky, you'll reach the county line before the sun notices you're gone." Finn looked down at the card. The typing was uneven. The ink faded in some places and dark as dried blood in others. Rules for the night shift at O'Malley's Pump and Go. 1. If a car pulls up with no driver, do not go outside to check the pump. Enter 999 into the register and duck behind the counter until the entry bell rings. If you hear the gas cap being unscrewed, hold your breath. It breathes when you breathe. 2. The man in the red flannel shirt will ask for a map. We do not sell maps. Tell him the stars moved, and he will leave. Do not let him show you his compass. It doesn't point north. It points to the nearest beating heart. 3. The tapping on the roof is just the wind. The tapping under the floorboards is not. If the boards begin to groan, turn the radio to full volume and sing along. You must be louder than the scratching, or the wood will give way from below. 4. Never let the coffee pot go empty. If the liquid turns clear, do not pour it out. Call it the special and offer it to the next customer who doesn't blink. Do not drink it yourself, or you will stop blinking too. 5. If the mirrors in the restroom show a hallway instead of a wall, do not enter. Lock the door and put up the out-of-order sign. If someone knocks from the inside, ignore the plea. They have been in there since the station was built. 6. At 3 a.m., the corn will start to whisper. Close the shutters. If you can hear what they are saying, it is already too late. Do not answer them, even if they use your mother's voice. 7. If a customer tries to pay with coins that feel warm, do not put them in the drawer. Throw them into the gravel outside immediately. They are eyes. 8. The phone will ring at 4:44 a.m. Do not answer it. It is a long-distance call from someone who hasn't been born yet. Finn watched Silas disappear into the darkness of the cornfields, the taillights of his rusted truck flickering out like dying embers. He was alone. The first 2 hours were an exercise in sensory deprivation. The hum of the refrigerated drink cases was the only company Finn had. A low-frequency vibration that seemed to vibrate in his very marrow. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered with a rhythmic crackle pop, casting long, distorted shadows that seemed to dance just out of his line of sight. At 1:12 a.m., the silence was shattered. A rusted midnight blue sedan drifted into the lot. It didn't have its headlights on, and the engine made no sound. It simply glided over the cracked pavement like a ghost over water. It rolled to a stop at pump 4 with a heavy metallic groan. Finn waited for a door to open, for a traveler to step out and stretch their legs. But the car sat motionless. Through the grainy security camera, Finn zoomed in. The driver's seat was empty. The passenger seat was empty. Even the steering wheel seemed to be missing, replaced by a smooth, blank dashboard of polished bone-white plastic. Finn entered 999 into the register and ducked. He punched the keys, the plastic clicking loudly in the quiet shop. He slid down behind the counter, his back against the cool metal of the cigarette rack. Outside, he heard the clack-clack-clack of the gas pump being lifted. Then, the sound of liquid rushing through a hose. But it didn't sound like gasoline. It sounded thick, like honey or syrup. Then came the sound that made his skin crawl. The gas cap being unscrewed. A slow, screeching metal-on-metal sound. Finn realized he was breathing heavily. He remembered the rule. It breathes when you breathe. He clamped his hand over his mouth, forcing his lungs to stay still. The shop's entry bell let out a sharp, crystalline ding. The air in the shop suddenly turned freezing, smelling of wet earth and ozone. A heavy weight moved across the linoleum. Not footsteps, but a sound like a heavy bag of grain being dragged. Drag. Pause. Drag. It stopped right at the counter. A wet, whistling sound emerged from the air above him, a sound like air passing through a flute made of raw meat. Finn's lungs screamed for air, his vision blurring. After what felt like an eternity, the bell rang again. When he finally peeked over the counter, the car was gone, leaving only a dark, shimmering puddle of oil on the pavement that seemed to pulse with a faint, rhythmic purple light. By 2 a.m., the wind had picked up, howling through the rusted rafters of the canopy. A man walked in. He wore a red flannel shirt so worn the elbows were white. His skin was unnaturally pale, and his eyes were 2 different sizes. One pinpricked and dark, the other wide and milky. He walked straight to the counter and leaned over, his shadow stretching across the floor at an angle that didn't match the overhead lights. He smelled of old paper and rain. "I'm lost," the man said, his voice sounding like 2 stones grinding together. "You got a map? I need to get to Oakhaven." Finn's throat went dry. Oakhaven had been wiped off the map by a tornado 30 years ago. He looked at the empty shelf where maps should be. He remembered the rule. Tell him the stars moved. "We don't have maps," Finn said, his voice trembling. "The stars moved, sir. The path you're looking for isn't where it used to be." The man in a red flannel froze. His larger eye began to spin slowly in its socket. He reached into his pocket and started to pull out a heavy brass-cased compass. "But my needle," he hissed. "It says the heart is right here." The needle wasn't metal. It was a sliver of bone, and it was twitching violently toward Finn's chest. "The stars moved," Finn shouted, backing away. The man stopped. He tilted his head at an impossible angle, a wet crack echoing from his neck. Moved? Again? They never stay still when the soil is hungry. He turned around and walked out, but instead of heading for the road, he walked straight into the corn, his body dissolving into the stalks like smoke. The shift grew heavier. At 2:45 a.m., a rhythmic tap, tap, tap began on the roof. Finn ignored it, as per Rule 3. But then, the sound shifted. It came from beneath his feet. Thump, thump, thump. It sounded like a giant hand was knocking on the underside of the building, trying to find a weak spot in the foundation. Finn turned the radio to full volume and sang. He lunged for the dial on the old shop radio. A static-filled country station blared out. Finn began to sing. He didn't know the words, so he made them up, shouting at the top of his lungs about trucks and heartbreaks. The thumping below grew violent, the floorboards vibrating so hard the candy bars rattled off the shelves. He could see the linoleum floor actually bowing upward, as if something with massive, blunt fingers was trying to peel the building open from the bottom. He sang until his throat was raw, his voice cracking and breaking. He sang Amazing Grace, and then switched to a heavy metal song he barely remembered. As abruptly as it had started, the thumping stopped. The silence that followed was so heavy it made his ears ache. When he looked down, the floor was permanently warped, a set of 4 indentations shaped like a massive hand left in the wood. At 3 a.m., the sound began. It wasn't the wind anymore. It was a billion tiny voices coming from the surrounding fields. The corn was tall, standing like a wall of soldiers around the station, and they were all leaning toward the building. He scrambled to pull the heavy metal shutters over the windows. He almost had the last one closed when a gust of wind carried the voices to him. They weren't whispering gibberish. They were whispering his mother's secret recipe for apple pie. Then, his childhood dog's name. Finn, the corn whispered, a sound like dry husks rubbing together. We know why you left the city. We know what you did with the money. He slammed the shutter and bolted it, leaning his forehead against the cold steel. He could still hear them. A low, rhythmic chanting of his social security number and the exact time of his birth. He hummed to himself, louder and louder, trying to drown out the intimate, rustling secrets of the stalks outside. For a full hour, the building shuddered as the corn pressed against the walls, its leaves scratching at the metal like thousands of tiny, desperate fingernails. The night became a blur of terror. He checked the coffee pot. The dark roast had vanished, replaced by a liquid so clear it looked like molten glass, shimmering with an internal, sickly light. A woman entered at 4 a.m. She wore a sundress that looked 50 years out of fashion. She didn't blink, not once. Her eyes were wide, glassy spheres that reflected the fluorescent lights. She stood at the counter, her eyes fixed on the coffee pot. I need something to keep me awake for the long drive, she whispered. I have the special, Finn said, pouring the shimmering, clear liquid into a foam cup. She took it, her fingers ice cold as they brushed his. She drank the entire cup in one go, even though the liquid was visibly boiling. As she walked away, Finn noticed she didn't have a shadow. The light from the ceiling shone right through her, revealing a chest cavity filled with nothing but dry corn silk. She paused at the door, turned, and stared at him with those unblinking eyes. It tastes like tomorrow, she said, before vanishing into the night. At 4:44 a.m., the rotary phone on the wall began to ring. It didn't sound like a modern phone. It sounded like a bell being struck with a hammer. Finn sat on the floor, his hands over his ears. The phone rang and rang, the sound seemingly vibrating inside his skull. He looked at the caller ID. It didn't show numbers. It showed a string of symbols that looked like ancient constellations. On the 10th ring, the voicemail picked up, even though the machine was unplugged. "Daddy?" A voice came through the speaker, tiny and distant, as if calling from the bottom of a well. "Is that you? It's cold in the before time. I'm coming to see you in the harvest of 32. Don't let the man in red take my map." Finn squeezed his eyes shut. He didn't have a child. He wasn't even married. The voice was a haunting promise of a future that felt like a threat. The final hour was the longest. Finn felt a desperate need to splash water on his face to stay awake. He went to the small, cramped restroom in the back. When he looked in the mirror, he gasped. His reflection was gone. In its place was a long, dark hallway lined with heavy wooden doors. At the end of the hallway, a small, pale child stood, holding a red flannel shirt. The child began to run toward the glass, its face twisted into a silent scream. Finn backed out of the room, fumbled for the keys, and locked the door from the outside. He hung the out-of-order sign with trembling hands. Through the wood, he heard a soft, rhythmic scratching, followed by a heavy thud, as if a body had been thrown against the door. "Let us out," a dozen voices whispered. "The stars have moved, and we want to see." As the clock struck 5:30 a.m., a final customer entered. He was a teenager, no older than 18, wearing a varsity jacket from a school that didn't exist. He bought a pack of gum and handed Finn 3 coins. Finn took them, but nearly dropped them. The coins were made of a heavy, dark stone, and they were radiating a feverish, unnatural heat. He looked down and saw that each coin had a tiny, lidless eye carved into the center, and the eyes were blinking. Finn didn't even put them in the register. He ran outside, the cold morning air hitting his face like a slap. He flung the coins as far as he could into the darkness of the lot. As they hit the ground, the gravel hissed and turned black, a low, pained groan rising from the earth. At 6 a.m. sharp, the first sliver of gray light broke over the horizon. The corn stopped whispering. The floor stayed still. Silas's truck pulled back into the lot. He walked inside, glancing at the warped floor and the salt handprint on the glass. He looked at Finn, who was sitting on a crate of soda, staring at nothing. "You did all right," Silas said, pulling a fresh laminated card from his pocket. "Most don't make it past the 999 part. They always try to see who's driving." "I'm leaving," Finn whispered. "Sure you are," Silas said, his eyes turning to the mirror in the bathroom. "But check your pockets first. The field always takes its cut." Finn reached into his pocket. He pulled out a handful of grain, perfect golden kernels of corn. But as he watched, the kernels began to pulse. They turned into teeth, human teeth. Finn didn't wait for his paycheck. He got into his car and drove. But as he looked in his rearview mirror, he didn't see the road. He saw a long, dark hallway. And standing at the end of it, waving a slow, rhythmic goodbye, was a version of himself wearing a red flannel shirt,